All right. Hi, everybody. I think we're back. We had a couple of technical difficulties. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, my name is Matthew Rocknich. I'm a developer advocate. Today, I'll be giving a crash course on the DocuSign APIs alongside some very useful demonstrations and explanation of how to make your first request with DocuSign, how to use our API for your hackathon projects for the Good Code Hackathon. So let's jump right in. Our agenda for the day, we have about 45 minutes-ish. So I'll blast. If you haven't yet already, please register for our hackathon. Most of you are here for this reason. The URL is docusign2020.devpost.com. So go ahead and register, and there's a ton of perks. Most importantly, the opportunity to really impact a real-world organization. FSC, the Forest Stewardship Council, is an amazing organization we partnered with, and there's a number of applications that they need help building. On your end, one of the cool things is that there's $8,000 on the line to win for the hackathon. And so it's a great way for you to spend some of this shelter-in-place time during this not great time. So that being said, let's hop into the agenda. So our agenda, first I'll talk about the Agreement Cloud APIs. I'll talk about getting started with the e-signature API, some terminology, authenticating your requests, sending and signing, and I'll show two demos. One, some popular workflows via our Node.js SDK, and then also some testing tips and troubleshooting information with Postman. So let's jump right in. If you were on the stream previously, I talked a bit about the one marketing slide I promised that I'll have in this presentation, and that is the DocuSign Agreement Cloud. This vision was most recently kind of shown to the world following what we made popular, and that was e-signature. So DocuSign of old was primarily the sign part of the cloud. Since then, we've begun to grow out our different features and functionality. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to focus predominantly on the sign area of our Agreement Cloud. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a number of different APIs. If you're interested in the other parts of our platform, there's documentation, code examples, tools on our developers.docusign.com site. And on there, you'll find more information about the other APIs. But for this presentation, we're going to focus in on the e-signature REST API. So here's a short list of a couple things you can accomplish using our e-signature REST API, the first of which is actually the most basic, and that is sending an envelope via email. Think of an envelope like you would an envelope in the mail. An envelope contains documents. It has a to and from field. It has postage. All these things translate well to the DocuSign object model. And so when you send an envelope via email, what you're doing is you're sending a secure link to a recipient to click and open up our application to sign. And I'll show you that more a bit later, including the code. Second, you can embed our signing ceremony within your application. So if you are trying to prevent any sort of context switches and you want to keep your users in your application as much as possible, which is preferred, this is a great option. Third, you can send an envelope using a template to reuse and repurpose certain workflows with DocuSign. Fourth, you can send an envelope and collect payment simultaneously, which is super helpful and avoids having to pull in other libraries and add more functionality. You can do a lot of things just with DocuSign. And last, but certainly not least, the list goes on and on and on. These are some of my favorites. You can require ID verification for one of your recipients before they're allowed to interact with an envelope. This is one of a couple different recipient authentication types that you can tack onto your envelope. So what IDV actually means is that me as a recipient, I'll actually have to scan scan a picture of my government-issued ID or passport, and only then we'll use some machine learning models, algorithms to ensure that you are exactly who you say you are, and only then will you be allowed to access that envelope, which is a really cool feature. In terms of how you can access the API, there's two core ways. The first of which is direct API access. For all my JavaScript lovers out there, using Axios, you can specify manually your headers and your request body. Many of our developers do this. It gives you a ton of control, and this is a reasonable way to go. For this particular route, you definitely want to heavily use our developers.docusign.com site and the API reference to figure out how to build up those envelope definitions, and I'll talk a bit more about this later. But our second option is very, very powerful as well, and that's using our SDKs. We have SDKs in most, if not all, major languages, probably any language that you're going to be developing on. including C#, Java, PHP, Node, iOS, and most recently Android, which is now GA and available on GitHub. One notable thing about the SDKs over the direct API access is that there's some features and functionality that's built specifically into the SDKs that's language specific or specific to that platform. For example, the iOS SDK has a feature called offline signing that allows you to enable your end users that are off in the wilderness and may not have access to Cell Signal to still receive signatures on their phone and upload those signatures later to DocuSign. And so we have a bunch of customers now that really appreciate that, as Cell Signal is always touch and go in certain key areas. So you have two options. Now, in terms of DocuSign terminology, drink break. In terms of DocuSign terminology, the most basic object model has 4 key terms that you should be familiar with. The first of which is an envelope. Think of an envelope as a single transaction. An envelope, there's a hazard relationship with the other 3 components: document, recipients, and tabs. An envelope also has a couple properties, namely, and most importantly, status. So envelope has status, and I'll talk more about the different status types that envelope may transition to or from. Inside an envelope, you have documents. Documents have properties such as an ID, as a document name. There's a number, file extension, and then lastly, the actual property that contains the information that we accept. So how you pass the document, and that's a base64 encoded format. And I'll actually show you explicitly how you do that. Under envelope, you also have recipients. And so recipients are the individuals who need to act on your envelope, most popular of which is a signer recipient. And a signer needs to either sign or initial or add some text to an input field. Other recipient types are carbon copy, who receives a copy. You have certified delivery, who is required to receive a full transcript of the transaction at the end once it's completed. And there's a number more there. Based on your use cases for this hackathon, regardless, I would highly suggest that you head to our developer center and just review the different recipient types. Many developers I speak with are kind of, they assume that there's only one recipient type and they stick to signers, when there's a variety of different recipient types that might embolden and empower your workflow. So check those out. Now, under recipients, each recipient may have one or more tabs. If you ever sign with DocuSign, these are the cute colored buttons that are located on the document. And so you can assign tabs to recipients. The most popular tab is the Sign Here tab. This is what we got popular off of. And there's other tabs too. There's text tabs, there's conditional tabs, there's payment tabs. That list also is very extensive. And so based on what you're looking to do and sort of the action you're looking to require from your recipients, I would check the tab listing for the most appropriate field or tab. Now, not shown in this demo is going to be templates and webhook status updates, both of which are both common flows, but outside the scope of this presentation. Templates are exactly what they sound like. Instead of recreating the object model that we have listed on the right every time you build up your envelope definition, templates allow you to do it once and then reference a template ID when you make an API request, which is a lot easier on your behalf and allows you to partner with a business individual in your company who can then go into our UI and build up envelopes that way, and then provide you a template ID to send programmatically. It makes the workflow a bit easier. But again, it's outside the scope of this presentation. If you are curious about templates, our Dev Center has a ton of information and guides on templates. And second is webhook status updates. Very, very common would be that developers need to know the status of their envelope or the status of their recipients during the course of their application. For example, they might want to change something on the front end, a color of a button, or have some sort of business logic get triggered once your DocuSign envelope is completed. We accomplish this, or we suggest you accomplish this, with what we call our Connect service. And Connect allows you to receive notifications from us as opposed to continuously polling DocuSign. This is preferred because we have specific polling restrictions, and those restrictions are also on the Dev Center as well. If you have any questions about these things, be sure to ask us in the Good Code Hackathon Slack, or also on our Stack Overflow handle. Okay, now comes kind of fork in the road, and this is a very important decision you should make. That's between remote signing and embedded signing. So for remote signing, this flow should sound fairly familiar. Most people who have worked with DocuSign, whether it be developers or your parents or friends and family, they've received a secure link via email that says, "Please sign with DocuSign." Many people who have signed mortgages with DocuSign. This flow is implemented via remote signing, whether it be in the UI or the API. So in the API, you can actually build up an envelope definition and send off request to sign via email. This is what we call remote signing. In this case, again, the link is sent securely via email, and DocuSign will authenticate the signer. The disadvantage of this flow is that if you're building an application, there is an inherent context switch that's required. For example, if I'm on XYZ application and I fill out a form, and that form is going to trigger, the submit button is going to trigger a DocuSign envelope to be created and sent, your application might throw a modal that says, go ahead and check your Gmail for an email from DocuSign and sign it, which is okay. But a lot of our developers prefer to keep their users in the application itself. And that's where embedded signing comes into play. So instead of requiring them to tab over, to open a new window and go to Gmail, you can actually have an additional step to generate a recipient view URL and redirect your user within your application directly to the signing ceremony without requiring them to navigate away to Gmail. And so embedded signing in that case is sort of a best practice, and we highly suggest our developers to implement the embedded signing flow over the remote signing flow, unless you have a specific requirement. I will show both of these flows in code using Node. Before we get there, I just want to mention that the way to actually implement this is specifying a client user ID attribute when you populate the recipient objects. That to DocuSign will mean, okay, this particular recipient will be signing in an embedded environment and not via email. And so your end user, in that case, will not receive an email if you've specified the client user ID. And I'll talk a bit more about additional authentication types for recipients, including the IDV feature that I've previously spoken about. Okay, I mentioned one more quick coffee break. Much better. I mentioned envelope status as one thing I wanted to cover. So an envelope has status. When you're building up your envelope definition, you will be prompted to, or required to specify a status. Created status means that your envelope will sit in draft status in your DocuSign account. It will not be sent to the recipients you've specified. This is common if you want to make changes or you're testing things out. The second status is sent. When you specify sent and make a create envelope request, that envelope will be sent immediately to the recipients you've specified. Delivered means that your envelope has been delivered to your recipients and they have viewed it. Completed means that all of the actions that you've specified for your recipients have been completed in its entirety. This is sort of the sales folks, hurrah, because this means that the transaction or the envelope has been fully completed and the deal is done. Declined means that one or more of your recipients have declined to complete their actions. For example, if a signer declines to sign a document, it'll get kicked back to your sender with a declined status. And then last but not least, voided means that the sender has voided the envelope entirely, meaning he or she has negated the entire thing. And so that's what voided means. You'll see these statuses as you're working through your workflow and figure out what will my envelope look like as I'm creating it, as I'm sending it, as my recipients are interacting with it. You'll see these sort of statuses. Okay, so now our demo overview. I'll be using the Node.js SDK alongside one of our code example repos on GitHub. In terms of authentication, I'll be using the authorization code grant flow with a specific passport library, and we have a cool DocuSign plugin for that library. And then the three use cases that I'll be showing in this presentation are the request signature via email, which I mentioned previously, also the embedded signing flow, and then also one cool throw in the list envelope status call and sort of the return response object from that call as well. So without further ado, one last slide. When you're actually building, if you follow along this video, one thing that I'll skip over quickly is some of the configurations that are required for the code example repo. It's super quick. You just navigate to this particular view, and I'll show you where this is in a moment, and specify the authentication type that you'll be using, namely authorization code grant. You'll add your secret keys and then add a redirect URI, which will allow the code example repo to work properly. For more information on authentication as a whole, it's a longer conversation. You can ask questions in chat or ask questions in our Slack channel, and I'll be more than happy to address the differences between auth code grant or GWT or implicit grant. But right now, we're going to stick with just auth code grant for this presentation. OK, let's go to our first demo. So here we are. We are on the DocuSign Developer Center. And so what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our eSignature API. Let's go to here. We're going to go to eSignature REST API. Perfect. We're going to navigate to code examples. Let's go to sending and signing. And on here, we have a listing of a variety of different code examples for each flow. Let's get started with the requesting a signature via email or remote signing flow. And as you'll notice, in the upper right corner here, we have example project launchers. Each launcher is equivalent, and they all contain roughly 30 or 31 different code examples that map to the most popular workflows the developers build with DocuSign's eSignature API. So at this point, if you're thinking, OK, I'm not a Node developer, that's fine. We have example launchers in a variety of other languages. So you're welcome to follow along as I'm doing this, just in the language of your choice. So if I click on Node.js example project, this will bring us to GitHub. And we have our open source repo containing, our README has a listing and description of all 31 of the code examples. And then beneath is the getting started installation steps. So I'm going to skip over those. I already have a repository running currently with my configuration information from DocuSign. And so I have it here. And so this is a running version of the code examples launcher. So let's go ahead and get started. If I can log in, I'm going to log in using my account. I'm going to authenticate. And while I'm doing this, if you have not yet created a developer sandbox, you can do so on the homepage of the DocuSign Developer Center. If anyone in chat or watching later has not done that, make sure, or has any issues with that, make sure to ask in the Slack channel, and our representatives will be more than happy to point you in the right direction. So now we are authenticated with DocuSign. And now we can test out the different flows and see what they look like from the end user perspective, so that now I can go ahead and implement them later as a developer. So let's go ahead and start with the send an envelope with the remote email signer and CC recipient. If I click on this use case, it will give me a description of what it's going to do and how it does it, and also the API method that's used to accomplish this, with a link to the specific source on GitHub. So let's go ahead and add a CC recipient. I'm going to add my personal. And once I click submit, it's going to make that request, that the create envelope method, the post request of the envelope's endpoint containing the information that I want. And I'll show you the code in a moment. So if I click submit, I should get a success message in the launcher. I'll take a sip of coffee while this is happening. All right, cool. So now we have our envelope. There's the envelope ID. Let's go ahead and tab over and see what it looks like from an end user now it's been sent. All right, so here we're in Gmail. I'm going to go and refresh. Great. And here we are. There's Dave Developer. Please sign this document set. This is, if you've ever signed with DocuSign before, this should look very familiar. But this was created programmatically, this envelope. So let's go ahead and review. I see Dave Developer, which is the name of the account. Please DocuSign order acknowledgement. So I'm going to go ahead and review this. It will open up the signing ceremony in my browser. I'll click continue. And we have various fields that are populated on our documents. I click sign. Great. I can click sign on this document as well. Awesome. And then the third one. And finish. So that's what would be required of the recipient in this particular flow. Then it'll navigate to a post-sign splash page. Cool. So that is done for the first flow. That's remote signing. I'll show you embedded signing, and then I'll show you the code. So let's go back to our launcher, and let's go to the home page. And let's look at the embedded signing flow now. So the embedded signing ceremony is very similar in that it builds up a very similar envelope definition, but there's an additional step after, and that is to create that recipient view URL and redirect me. So I always say, at this step, let's put on the pretending hat and pretend like you are an end user for your application. And right now, we are in your application. And there's some flow, and I enter in a signer email, a signer name, and I'm going to click this form, and it's going to navigate us to DocuSign. So let's click submit. what's happening is the envelope's being created, and your particular recipient URL is being generated, and now we're immediately redirected to DocuSign. So as you notice, there's no context switch, at least discernible context switch, besides you're in the same browser window, and your end user now will click continue, and will sign the document and finish, and will be then redirected back to DocuSign with some interesting query parameters, namely state. So you can specify state if you want to save that. We'll also throw an event, signing complete. So you can use that as well as a flag that your recipient has signed. One quick information security call out that's important. Many of you know URLs can be spoofed, so don't use this as the only sign that your recipient has signed and completed his or her actions. Instead, we would suggest that you make an additional API request to check recipient status, just to confirm that it is indeed true before you base any business logic off of that single query parameter. Cool. So that should kind of give you an idea of what it looks like at a base level to implement remote and embedded signing. Let's look at the code now to see how to do those. All right. So here we are in VS Code. Here is the Node code examples launcher that I just showed you, and we're going to go into the lib folder. Under examples, you should see the 31 different examples or 30 different examples. We're going to look at the signing via email 002 example first. So here we're pulling in the DocuSign eSign SDK, and we're creating a controller. The majority of the work that is important to us right at this moment is the worker method. So here we're instantiating our DocuSign API client, setting the base path, adding our default header of authorization with our access token. And again, I kind of jumped over that for the purposes of just talking about the different features of the API specifically. But again, if you have questions more as it relates to authentication, we'll talk about that later. And then we instantiate an envelopes API as well. For step one, this is where the core of the envelope definition is built up. We then pass off that envelope definition to our official post request to create the envelope, and passing in the account ID and also our envelope. And then we just have a confirmation, a console log to confirm that the envelope ID is not null. So cool. Let's actually walk through the entirety of the make envelope method, and this should be eye-opening as to how exactly to build up an envelope using Node. The data specifically used for this method is namely the arguments that you saw when we sent off that envelope. I can quickly navigate back to the example just to show you explicitly what these are. And here are the 4 arguments, right? Our sender name, our sender email, a CC email, and CC name. So those are those pieces of information. We also have the demo documents that are used in that flow. If you noticed, we did go kind of quickly through the signing ceremony the first time, but there were actually 3 documents in that envelope. I've heard, surprisingly, a number of developers say, can you only include PDFs with DocuSign? The answer is no. Not only can you include multiple different types, but you can also include multiple different types in the same envelope. So in this example, we actually show that. We have HTML, we have docx, and a PDF all included in the same envelope for your recipients. This flow also has 2 recipients, as I mentioned, a signer and a CC in that particular order. So the signer receives the envelope first, and then a CC will receive a copy after, in that order. So let's go to the code. So the first thing we will want to do is actually read our files. The files in this repo are contained in the demo documents folder. The next thing we want to do is define our envelope definition. So you do that by instantiating a new envelope definition, and then we're immediately going to set the email subject up here to please sign this document set. Next, we're going to go ahead and define our documents. So we'll create a new DocuSign document and populate it with, we'll do that down here. We also define our document 1 base64, doc2 base64, and doc3 base64, which is the format, kind of the default format that we accept programmatically via the API. And so here we'll pass in the arguments to a doc1 method. Down here, I believe that simply just returns the HTML. Yeah, this first one is the HTML. So this will return a string of HTML. The second one, I believe, is our docx, and the third is the PDF. And so now what we'll have in each of these variables is just the base64 format for each of the respective documents. Now for doc1, which is our DocuSign document object, we'll pass in a couple different properties, namely the doc1 base64. Second, the name, so we're calling this order acknowledgement. Third, the file extension, HTML for the first one, and then a document ID. The doc ID is used as a reference for that particular document. Let's say later you want to update the first document in this order form. If you had created the envelope in draft status and it's sitting on your server and you go, oh, I want to change the first document, you can do so by referencing the doc ID. Next, we'll go ahead and create a new document and pass in the information for the second document, which includes the name, file extension again, and then our doc ID 2. This format is just using constructor. Similar for doc 3. And then last, we'll go ahead and drop each of the document objects into an array and populate the documents property under the envelope. Now, one question or thought you might be having as far as like, my God, like, they might be going through mental hurdles as to imagine how the envelope definition looks in terms of like, what does the format look like? I'll show you exactly what this looks like in JSON format shortly. I just want to show you, what you need to do using the SDK to build this up in this way. Next, we'll go ahead and create our recipients. So as you remember from the workflow, we have a signer and a CC. So for the signer, you'll call DocuSign.signer.construct_object and pass in the relevant information, namely email, name, recipient ID, and routing order. Again, routing order is important to indicate which recipient will receive the envelope first. So a routing order of 1 and a routing order of 2 for the following recipient means that clearly the signer will receive first and the CC will receive second. If instead you wanted your signer and CC, or let's say, for example, you had 2 signers and you wanted each signer to receive the envelope simultaneously, you would just specify routing order of 1 or the same number for both signers. And really, that's where we get into more complex flows, and you have half a dozen signers. We can talk more about that later, but really, it's very, very powerful in terms of the variety of use cases that you can implement. So similar workflow for our carbon copy. You instantiate a new carbon copy and populate the properties with the relevant information. Next, we're going to go ahead and create our tabs or fields. So as I mentioned, sign here is a very popular field. Go ahead and construct a tab containing an anchor string. As a quick aside, there's a couple different ways of placing or positioning your fields. In this flow, we're using anchor tags or auto positioning names for it. So what we'll do is specify a specific string for DocuSign to look for, and then replace that string with a tab or field with some offset. So in this case, it's looking for a ** signature ***. In this case, for sign here 2 is looking for a /SN1. And it'll basically drop the tab exactly where you intend. This is kind of a preferred method over fixed positioning, which is a specific XY coordinate, which is not always the best. So next, after we instantiate or create our tabs, we'll go ahead and assign the tabs to our recipient. So as you mentioned, we only have 1 signer and 1 CC, so we're going to assign these fields or tabs to our signer recipient. So we'll create a tabs object and then populate it with our sign here tabs with the sign here, each respective sign here tab contained in that array. And then go ahead and assign sign here tab, sign here 1.tabs to sign here 1 tabs. Next, we'll go ahead and add the recipients to the envelope object to kind of sum up the entire envelope definition and make sure that it's properly formatted. And then last but not least, set the status to sent so that once we make this post request, it will immediately send off this envelope for its respective actions. Cool. That was a mouthful, but hopefully you follow that along and it makes sense. And again, in a moment, I'll show you what exactly this looks like just from raw API perspective, and it'll make a lot more sense, I think. Before we jump off to the next demo, I want to show you now the embedded signing flow and the key difference between embedded signing and remote signing. So let's look at the embedded signing flow. This should look very familiar. In fact, it's very familiar. The create controller is very familiar, very similar. Our worker is very similar, except for one key detail, and that's step 3. So in step 3, instead of relying on that envelope to be signed via email or receive the email, we'll actually make an additional step where we will create a recipient view, and I'll show you how DocuSign knows that your signer will be signing in an embedded environment as opposed to email. So this is the key step, this make recipient view request. And then one key call out here is for our recipient, when we define that object, client user ID is a very, very important detail. So again, as another kind of repetition of this, because people always forget, I see this question a lot in Stack Overflow. make sure you specify client user ID, because that will prevent us from sending an email to that recipient, but instead expect that recipient is going to sign via the embedded environment. Okay. And then the actual make recipient view request method is fairly straightforward. We'll go ahead and call the recipient view request method, and then redirect our user, pass in some, you can make state whatever you'd like. You can even add authentication methods here. We talked about IDV. We talked about there's other types such as KBA, which is knowledge-based authentication. So if you store a secure or a private string, let's say your mother's maiden name, you can ensure that your end user is who they say they are by matching strings. And yeah, so that's the key difference between remote and embedded. So at this time, let's go ahead and navigate back to the slides and move on to testing tips. So I am most proud of this slide. This is the best slide I think I've ever developed in my time here at DocuSign. It's just beautiful. It's simple. I'm losing my mind. It's not that great of a slide, but the power behind, the meaning behind the slide is very important. And that is a very, very important tip that we like to impart to our dev community, and that's enabling logging to troubleshoot your requests. So I'll kind of show you the 3 steps and 3 tips that I have in here, and then I'll go ahead and implement them for you and show you how you can use them. So first is enabling logging to troubleshoot your requests. And then second is tinkering using our OAuth token generator. This allows you to not have to implement full authentication and just generate an OAuth token to use either via Postman or via your code. Now, one important note is that this token is only valid for 8 hours. So it's great for a hackathon in that you can kind of test and tinker. If you're doing a full integration, or after the hackathon, if you're building out an integration, you will need to implement one of the various types of authentication, whether it be authorization code grant or JWT or implicit grant. But for this hackathon, this is more than sufficient. And third is utilizing Postman and our Postman collection to test your requests. I use it very, very frequently to help out developers on Stack Overflow or via our help alias via email. And so I'll show you where to get this and just give you an example of using the Postman collection to make a request in a moment. So let's start off with logging. So as you've seen, I've made a number of different requests from the context of our code examples launcher. If I go back to our demo sandbox, let's go ahead and log back in. Let's go ahead and log in. Oops. Now, once I log into the demo sandbox, here is the first view that I see. If I select the profile icon in the upper right and I click on my preferences, this will bring me to my user preferences. Under privacy and security, I can then scroll down, and down here there's a request logging area. I've already enabled logging, so I'm going to go ahead and clear these logs just for the purpose of the demo. And you can click on enable logging if you're following along. Now let's go ahead and just make a request. So I'm going to go back to home, and just to clarify, I'm logged in my demo sandbox as Dave Developer, and I've also logged in and I'm using my Dave Developer account for this launcher. So any requests that I make will be logged in the demo account. As a clarification as well, this is logging all actions from my user, which includes UI requests that are made as I progress through the UI. I'm sorry, to clarify, any API requests that are made as I progress and move throughout the UI. So you might see some additional requests in there that make no sense. It's probably because you were navigating around the UI. So let's go ahead and try something. So let's just do the send an envelope with the remote email signer again. And I will go ahead and add in my CC. Let's click submit. We'll wait a moment. I take a sip of coffee. God, my mouth gets so dry. Oof. Okay, the envelope has been sent. Let's navigate back to our demo sandbox and refresh. And what I should see is I should see in a moment some logs. Great. Let's go ahead and download those logs. I'm going to open up this zip. I'm going to see my downloads folder. I can go navigate to this log 2. I've done this previously. And here are logs. As I mentioned previously, a number of these might make no sense, but these are related to the actions you've taken in your user profile. So the last one here should make a lot of sense, and that's create and send an envelope. If I open this up in TextEdit, it's going to be really garbled and not easy to read. Let's go ahead and grab this all. We're going to copy this, and we're going to close that. And I'm going to close this and navigate to Visual Studio VS Code. Let's paste it in VS Code. And so now this should be cleaned up a bit. Let's clean this up. Let's prettify it. VS Code has some cool extensions that allow you to pretty things up quite a bit. Okay, so now we've prettied things up a bit. Here is a log that I receive. I mentioned previously, as we were building up the envelope definition in Node, there's a lot of code there, and there's a lot of things you have to remember. But this is kind of what it looks like once you've built it up. And that, again, our email subject, remember we added that. We added it in a document property, which contains an array of documents. And here's our 3 documents, 1, 2, 3, each with its own file extension, its own name, and ID. Then we have our recipients property, which contains it contains an object of key value pairs, the key being carbon copies, the first recipient, or signers, and that contains an array of that recipient type. So then we have an object within an array, objects within an array of email, name, recipient ID, and routing order. And if you scroll down, then we have lastly our status, and then the response from DocuSign. 201 created, and the response object, which is our envelope ID, status date time, and the status confirmation. So if you're ever troubleshooting and figuring, okay, like what did I do there? Like why is there an error? Go to the logs, very, very helpful. And also, this is a pro tip, one thing that we use internally even to help troubleshoot developers' issues on Stack Overflow. As you're building up more complex flows, it's very possible, because of the number of different features that are available at DocuSign, it's almost very likely, in fact, that you might build a flow that we don't have an example for. We don't have a code example for it. And so what I would suggest is going to your Developer Sandbox account. Let's go to Dev Sandbox account. And just simply using the UI once to build up your envelope, and then check the logs and see what the envelope definition looks like. And then you can add on that, or you can change that, or tweak that, as opposed to toiling over trying to build up your envelope definition in the SDK or just in the raw API, only to find that you could have just done it simply by going here and just testing it out. Creating an envelope in the UI, which again also uses our e-signature API just in the backend. So again, you can go in here, you can upload a document, you can add recipients, and you can tag your document just in the UI, and then that will be logged appropriately, and you can check those logs. So that is the first 2. Now, what I want to show you now is our Postman collection and the token generator real quickly. We have about 9 minutes left. So let me go ahead and navigate to our Dev Center. Under Resources, you have Tools. And in here, there's a couple things that are very, very helpful. First of which is our OAuth token generator. So if you click on this, and if I'm logged into my sandbox, I can go ahead and get an access token that I can copy and paste from this view and drop into your favorite client, your API client, or if you want to drop it into your code, that's fine too. And you can use that to test out requests. And the second thing I'll show you is the Postman collection, which is also available on the tools page. Here, you can just click on the guide, and the guide will walk you through steps to ultimately import some environmental variables into Postman and a collection of different kind of pre-canned requests that'll help you get started. And I'll show you that in a moment in Postman. So without further ado, let's actually use the envelope definition. Let's scroll. Let's do this. Yeah. Let's go ahead and use the envelope definition that I created here. I'm going to go ahead and grab this. Let's grab this. I'm going to copy that. Just don't save, that's fine. And I'm going to go to Postman. So in Postman, once you import your collection, it should look like this. You'll have categories of folders and different requests. I've selected one of the requests in a subfolder, the post request to the envelopes endpoint. This is what the whole request looks like. We have our headers, we have our body. I have a pre-canned body in here. Let's go ahead and remove that. I'm just going to drop in the request as a whole. So here's the request that we built using the Node.js SDK, and obviously we have a massive documents array here. Let's drop that down a bit. And what I can do is I can use our Postman collection. I'm sorry, excuse me, our OAuth token generator to drop in a token here in the headers. Once I have this dropped in, I did this 10 minutes ago. Once I have this token dropped in here, I can make requests to Postman and test and see whether they work, whether I get an error. So let's click send. Okay, so what I should see, hopefully, is that I should see a successful send from Postman with the same envelope definition that I sent in our code examples launcher. So here, as expected, it was successful, and it spits back an envelope ID here. And if you really don't trust me, we can actually navigate to our browser in a different window. Navigate to our browser and just see that at 10:54, I received an additional envelope by Dave again. There it is to sign. Common things that I do, in Postman, I will go and fiddle, with the envelope definition. So, in here, if a developer is having issues with tab types, usually it's because they're not specifying it correctly, or they're using a different object model. They're using composite templates or templates. Again, if you want to get more complex, there are different variety of different features. If you're interested in templates, we have guides on templates. But for the most basic flows, this is totally fine. Say, for example, you want to have your tab located differently. You can modify that here. You want to change the routing order. You want one person to receive an email before the other. You can change the routing order here. This is really handy way of fiddling with our API, just the raw API. If you want to do it that way. So that is the extent of what I was hoping to cover today. Let me just check my slides once again. In terms of developer resources, we have a number of developer resources, and this is a very, very important slide because I kind of condense all the resources and give you a quick TLDR on what's really useful. Namely, the Dev Center. Dev Center is the one-stop shop for everything. We have guides, code examples. I've showed you a little bit of Dev Center, but there's a lot more. Stack Overflow is invaluable to you. We have some awesome talent monitoring Stack Overflow to answer your questions. If you have a more in-depth question, this is a great place to go. You'll notice our Stack Overflow community is very lively. We take pride in being able to answer questions very quickly and being as helpful as possible. We also have a support center if you are a paid customer that just hopped onto the live stream today. Duxton University is great for more in-depth teaching and learning. For any technical topic, we have a variety of technical topics on Duxton or DSU, Duxton University. We have API office hours. So in addition to live streams, if you're interested, you're welcome to hop onto any number of our API office hour webinars, the next of which we have upcoming. We have a couple in August. What's the month? Yeah, a couple in August. And then YouTube videos wise, we have a few different series. We have Developing with DocuSign, which is more concrete, quick, how-to style videos. And then we have Developer Deep Dive, which is more complex, higher order discussions around new features, new initiatives. In addition, we have a blog. It's really good content in there. Straight from the Trenches is a great blog series where our developer support lets us know, hey, we have a lot of customers that are asking about this, or this is a common problem. And so we take that content and then refine it and put it into the Duxton developer blog. And if you are a partner on the call listening, we have specific partner resources as well, and you can see them in these links. But as a quick return back to the core reason why we're having this live stream, the Good Code Hackathon, if you have not already registered, make sure to do so at duxton2020.devpost.com. I'll go back to the slide here. And we really appreciate all of the support and all of the hard work that you as developers are putting into this. We put a lot of time into the Good Code Hackathon, and our partnership with them is very, very strong and very important to us. So we look forward to all the really cool things that you build with DocuSign and FSC. And without further ado, I think that I'm going to close unless there's any questions in the chat. David, awesome. Glad that you feel like an expert. I will be slinging contracts left and right. Interesting phraseology. But But glad to hear like the presentation. If you have any more questions, please reach out via the Good Code Hackathon Slack workspace or Stack Overflow. But without further ado, I will go ahead and close the live stream for today. Thank you all for joining, and have an awesome day.